Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now we will move into hypothesis testing, which is the second way of going about. The main difference is that here we are specifically looking for a particular mu value or a particular pi value and see whether the sample statistic that we get supports the hypothesis. So let's start with the definition for an hypothesis. An hypothesis is a proposition made as an argument as a basis for reasoning, and there is absolutely no assumption about its truth. So let's understand this. So in the case of the mobile example, the claim that gets made is that the average battery life of these new batteries is 96 hours. It is just a claim, and the reason why it is a claim is that to ascertain the complete and absolute truth, the only way that we can end up doing that is by testing out the complete population. So let's say the manufacturer makes about 1 million pieces of this mobile, and if you really want to know what the truth is, you probably will have to test out every single piece that the manufacturer has made, compute an average and find out whether the average is either equal to 96 hours or greater than 96 hours. I think then the claim is completely substantiated and there is absolutely no assumptions about the truth that is required. But we know that in practice it's almost impossible from both the point of view of time that's involved in doing the testing as well as the cost implications that are involved. That's why we need to end up taking a sample and doing the testing. So the reason that the entire inferential statistics exist is because you cannot ascertain the complete truth. You are doing a test and you want to make a good judgment about what the truth would be. Yeah. So it's important to understand this concept because any hypothesis test also tells you, saying that listen, it's very likely to be the truth and not necessarily the truth. The truth can only be established if you test out the complete population. There are a few fixed components that are important, and it's important to understand what these components are and the nuances involved with it. So the components are the hypothesis is normally expressed in the form of a statement. So in the case of the mobile phone, it says the average life of a battery is 96 hours. So it's normally expressed as a null hypothesis, and also there is an alternate hypothesis which is the battery life is really not equal to 96 hours. The subtle nuances, you can express the alternate hypothesis as if you are a consumer, you are okay if the battery life is much greater than 96 hours. So you might want to express your null hypothesis as battery life is less than or equal to 96 hours, and the alternate hypothesis is that it is really greater than 96 hours. So you are not very happy if it is up to 96 or less than 96, but you are really happy if it is greater than 96. Yeah. But the entire proposition that we want to check out needs to be broken down into a null hypothesis and an alternate hypothesis, and the null plus alternate hypothesis should cover the entire realm of possibilities. The second component of a test is normally called the alpha value, which is also referred to as a significance level. We will look at what this means in the subsequent portion of this session. The third is really what is called a test statistic. So in the case of the mobile phone, we are interested in finding out what is the average number of hours a battery lasts. So the sample statistic is the X bar, that is the average of all the, let's say 100 samples that we took, and average value of battery life is a sample statistic. The sample statistic is converted into a test statistic using certain assumptions about the distribution of the data and the distribution of the sample means. We then compute a p-value using the test statistic, and that becomes the fourth important component. So, just to summarize, so there is a proposition which is converted into a null hypothesis and an alternate hypothesis, an alpha value, a test statistic that depends on the sample statistic, the distribution assumptions, and a p-value. So, these are four important components for you to conduct an hypothesis test. So, let us understand the hypothesis, the alpha, and there is a corresponding beta, etc. Through an example. Let us suppose you work in an organization and your organization is successfully manufacturing a certain type of product category, certain products, and let us say you are doing very well in the marketplace. But as technology is improving, the product also keeps improving. So, your product development team comes to you and says, they have developed a superior version to the existing product. But the catch is this, the superior version, if you want to produce it in a mass scale, you might have to make certain modifications to the existing production facilities. It is not a complete revamp, but you need to make some modifications. And those modifications would cost a certain amount of money, and let us say that it is going to cost you some $20 million. You know that the marketplace is looking for product improvements, and improving the product quality can either get you more buyers, or it can give you a higher price and therefore a higher revenue, and all of them will lead to a higher profit. So, the potential increase in profits could be up to USD 40 million, and the caveat is that the new product should be superior. So, if the new product is really superior, then you are likely to have a benefit of about $40 million from the marketplace, and the cost that you would incur is about 20 million to make the modifications. So, one normal way that most people before decide, because whether it is superior or not is not just a technical question, but it is also a question of whether the customers perceive it to be and whether the customers actually believe in those claims. So, your team decides you want to test the prototypes. So, develop some prototypes and test it with the customers before really taking a decision, before coming to a conclusion on is the new product seen as superior product, and then decide on your course of action. As I said, you cannot test this with every single customer, and you cannot test every single product that you make with customers to check out whether each product is superior to the existing product or not. So, you will never know what the truth is. But what the test will tell you is whether there is a reasonable evidence to suggest that whether the product is seen superior or not. So, the step number one is that the starting proposition or the claim that your product development team has made is that the new product is superior. So, your null hypothesis, which is normally set as a status quo, that is, the new product is just as good as the old product. So, the new product is either equal to or less compared to the old product, is your null hypothesis, and your alternate hypothesis is that the new product is really superior. Yeah. You are going to collect some data by doing the test with, by creating some prototypes and getting customers to experience the prototype and then evaluating that prototype in terms of whether the new product is superior or not superior. What you are clearly looking for is evidence which is strong enough to help you reject the null hypothesis. So, you want the evidence to be strong enough to say, yeah, so you want a lot of customers standing up and say the new product is really superior, in which case you can comfortably reject the null hypothesis that the new product is status quo, that is, it's as good as the old product, and thereby deciding to launch the product. So, if you reject the null hypothesis, you will decide to go ahead to launch a new product. So, you will make the modifications and thereby incurring a cost of 20 million, and hopefully you will get the benefit of the 40 million. But if the test suggests that the new product is not superior and the evidence is not strong enough, you will have to take a decision and say, listen, I may not get the 40 million because the 40 million is only on the condition that the new product is superior, and therefore I will not want to risk investing the 20 million. Okay. So, the first thing to understand is in every situation there is a decision that you want to take and there is a cost that is attached to this decision. Now, let us look at some possible scenarios. As I said, you will never know what the real truth is. So, the real truth could be that the new product is not superior or the new product is superior, and we will never know what it is. Yeah, you are going to get some data, and the data is going to suggest something about whether the new product is superior or not. So, the data can suggest that the new product is not superior, or the data can suggest that the new product is superior. This could very well be, let us say, a direct comparison of the two products, and out of the 100 people that you go and test it out with, 90 of them say the new product is superior, in which case the evidence is suggesting the new product is superior, or if 90 of them might say the new product is not superior, in which case you will conclude this. Yeah. But since you didn't have the time and cost to do this with every single individual and every single product, you are only relying completely on the data that you have and you don't know what the reality is. Yeah. Now, if the new product is really not superior and the data also suggests that the new product is not superior, you have ended up taking the correct decision. Okay. So, there is nothing wrong. Yeah. And similarly, if the new product is superior and the new product is seen superior in the by the customers also, even then you are taking up the correct decision. So, there are no issues if this is the scenario. But because you do not know what the reality is, there is always a possibility that the data might be suggesting that the new product is superior, but in reality the new product is really not superior. Yeah. So, you end up taking a wrong decision here, and similarly here, that is, the new product is superior in reality, but the data suggests that the new product is not superior. You are taking a wrong decision here too. Yeah. Now, there is a difference in the decision that you take in terms of the cost that is involved. So, there are two different types of error. So, the errors, the type 1 and the type 2 errors. So, let us understand what the cost involved in these decisions are. So, in this quadrant here, in reality the new product is not superior. Yeah. So, what this means is that if you launch this product in the marketplace, you are not going to get your 40 million. Yeah. But the data suggests that the new product is superior. Therefore, you are ending up launching the product. So, you are going to incur your 20 million and your 40 million is in doubt. So, that is a cost involved with this wrong decision. Let us understand the cost that is involved with this wrong decision here. The new product is really superior. So, if you have launched the product, you will get the 40 million. But because the data is suggesting that the new product is not superior, you are not going to launch, you are not going to incur this 20 million and therefore not launch. Therefore, you are ending up losing a potential profit of 40 million, which is an opportunity cost that gets lost. Yeah. Why is this important? As to what these levels of alpha and beta are really a function of what the costs that are involved with these decisions that gets taken. Yeah. Let us look at a statistics peek on this. So, what this means is that when you take this wrong decision, Yeah, the new product, the evidence is suggesting that the new product is superior. So you are rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true, because the product is really not superior. That means the product is just about as good as the old product, but the data is suggesting that the product is superior. So when the data suggests that, and you therefore reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is really true. Yeah. This decision is, you are not rejecting the null hypothesis, because not rejecting hypothesis when H0 is false. So the new product is really superior, but the data is suggesting that the new product is not superior. Yeah. So how do you control for these errors is really through the values of alpha and beta. Yeah. So let's look at some kind of a working definition for an alpha. So one way to look at the alpha as it's a kind of quantification of the risk that you're willing to take, and it's a maximum risk or the maximum level of uncertainty that you are willing to concede. So it's kind of a theoretical construct. So essentially, if you look at this, the new product is not superior, it means that the H0 is true in reality, or H0 is false, which you don't know exactly. The data suggestion here is that the new product is not superior. That essentially it says that do not reject null hypothesis. The new product is superior says reject null hypothesis. So alpha is the risk of rejecting the null hypothesis and therefore launching the new product. Yeah. When the H0 is true, that means new product is no good. Yeah. So from the quantities point of view, we had looked at about 20 million investment. So there is what is at risk is the 20 million investment, and this is the maximum risk that you are willing to allow. So that's the alpha, which is the maximum level of uncertainty that you are willing to concede in concluding that the new product is superior, when in reality the new product is not superior. As we looked at in the coin toss problem, the beta is just a consequence. So you cannot really fix your beta right up front. You can only fix your alpha. Beta is something that will naturally occur, and the idea is to compute what this beta is and to see whether it's an acceptable level or not an acceptable level. Yeah. Unfortunately, the alpha and beta are inversely related. So if you really increase, if you decrease alpha, you will end up increasing the beta. Now when will you decrease alpha? Let's take a case. So supposing somebody had told you that the investment decision is 20 million and the output is 40 million, you might say, listen, I will work with an alpha of, let's say, 0.05. So the maximum risk that you're willing to take is a 5% risk. Whereas if the same thing is turned around and said, listen, I think the initial investment is 300 million and the outcome could be 400 million. Now there's a much larger amount here at stake. So you will end up reducing the maximum level of uncertainty. So you're saying then, listen, I want to take just a 1% risk is what I am willing to allow. So in this case, you have really reduced the alpha, but what it does is you have made your test so stringent that your beta will increase. So the alpha and beta are inversely related, and you can only optimize between the two. You can never maximize both of them. So this is another trade-off that you should be willing to take. The p-value is really a kind of the level of uncertainty computed from the data. So while alpha is a theoretical maximum that you are willing to concede in terms of the amount of risk that you want, that you can afford, p is the computed level of uncertainty. So if p is less than the alpha, so you are saying that, listen, I am willing to take a kind of a 5% risk on this, and the p turns out just it says only 0.02, then you can go ahead and comfortably reject the null hypothesis, launch the new product, and hope for the best of consequences. But if the P is greater than the alpha that you have chosen, then you will not reject the null hypothesis. Then you will conclude saying that the computed risk is much more than the allowable risk, and therefore I do not want to reject the null hypothesis. I won't invest the money, but it's okay, and I'm going to lose some money on the other side of it. What I've just explained is nothing but, I think the alpha and beta, while there are some kind of numbers which normally people work with, ranging from 0.01 to 0.05, but it really should be a function of the consequences of the decision, as to how much you're going to lose by wrongly concluding or rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. Normally you fix your alpha understanding the consequences in terms of cost and your own risk appetite. So if it's a very large organization, even 300 million might be a worthwhile risk, depending upon the kind of marketplace they operate and the risk attached to it, etc., etc. Yeah. Whereas if you're a small operator, 300 million could be a very large. So there is no definitive value of alpha. So though there are some standard values with which people operate, the alpha is really a consequence of the decision. For example, if the alpha, if one of the wrong decision of taking this could be loss of life, then you want to keep your alpha to a very, very low value. Okay, so alpha is really is a function of the consequence of the cost and your own risk appetite. So what we have looked at is, given a null hypothesis, which is a claim, you can fix your alpha because you are hypothesizing a given value for alpha. In the case of mobile phones, whether it really is 96 hours or not, you are keeping your H0 as mu is equal to 96 hours. Yeah. So you know that what is the risk attached to it, and therefore you can fix your alpha. Beta comes into play only when H0 is not true. So when mu is not 96, the beta it has a certain beta value. Now when you say beta is not 96, now beta can take what it means is that the mu value can be 95, the mu value can be 99, the mu value can be 60, the mu value can be 116. It can take a range of possible values. So for each of these possible truth scenarios, there is a different beta that exists. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to compute for each different one, but we will look at some mechanism by which we can do it in a subsequent slide. So the alpha is what is normally fixed by any person who is conducting a hypothesis test. So some guidelines are, if you seek extraordinarily strong evidence, then you fix your alpha at a very low level at, let's say, 0.01. If you are seeking fairly strong evidence, you fix it at 0.05, and if the cost of the decision is not very high, then you might be okay with even a weak evidence, and you will fix your alpha at 0.1. So the 0.05 is a very, very well accepted figure. But as I said, this clearly is a function of the risk and the consequence of you being wrong in concluding one way or the other. So the costs that are involved needs to be considered before you actually take a decision on the alpha. So you compute a P from the data that you have, which is a computed uncertainty, and if the P, which is the computed uncertainty, is lower than the alpha, you can comfortably reject the null hypothesis. Yeah. So let's understand the concepts of alpha and beta through an example. Supposing, so I'm going back to the coin toss. Let's say somebody comes up to you and says, listen, I have a particular coin and I'm going to toss this coin 50 times, and if you get a certain number of heads, you stand to gain something. So somebody wants you to wager a bet on this. and let's say the wager is structured in such a way that if the coin is fair, it is beneficial for you to take the bet. But if the coin is unfair on either direction, that is, it's either biased towards more number of heads, or if it's biased towards more number of tails, then it is not beneficial to you. Then the decision that you need to make is really to understand whether the coin is fair or not. So your null hypothesis turns out that the probability of heads is really 0.5. So that's your null hypothesis, is essentially saying the coin is fair. And your alternate hypothesis is that your probability of heads is not equal to 0.5. So on either direction it is not beneficial to you. So if that is what you want to check out, we have seen this numbers before. So if you are allowed to do an experimentation before you decide to take the wager or not, and you toss a coin 50 times and you get a certain number of heads. So the probability distribution tells you that if it's a fair coin, so that the fair coin is determined by this p is equal to 0.5, and you have tossed the coin 50 times, the probability of you getting 0 heads is this, the probability of you getting 25 heads is this, etc. Yeah. Looking at some cumulative probabilities, so if the coin is fair and you toss it 50 times, the probability of you getting 0 to 18 heads is 0.032, and the probability of you getting 32 to 50 heads is 0.032. So 3% here, 3% here, and 93.5% of the time with a fair coin you will get a value between 19 to 31. So for you to conclude that the coin is fair, you may decide, okay, if I will do an experiment, I will toss a coin 50 times, and if the number of heads turns out to be 19 to 31 out of the 50 tosses, I will accept the wager. In which case, essentially what you are saying is, you are accepting, you are not rejecting the null hypothesis of probability of head is equal to 0.5 if the number of heads is anywhere between 19 to 31. In terms of the hypothesis testing, the alpha perspective, what you are really setting is that you are setting an alpha value of 0.065. So essentially you are saying, if I am getting any value between 0 to 18, or if I am getting any value between 32 to 50, I am going to reject the null hypothesis of H0. So, and the probability of you rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true, that is the coin, we know that the coin is fair because all these probabilities are arrived at using a fair coin. Yeah. So that probability is 0.065, which is really your alpha value. So by accepting 19 to 31 as a range with which you are okay with, you have set yourself an alpha value of 0.065. Yeah. We could have worked it the other way around. We could have said, listen, let me set the alpha as 0.05 and find out the cumulative probability which adds up to 0.95. Yeah. Which would have probably included part of the 32 and part of the 18 in your acceptance zone. Yeah. So that's alpha. So alpha is, even with a fair coin, there is a likelihood of you getting 0 to 18 heads or 32 to 50 heads. And in both these cases, you would have concluded that the coin is not fair. Yeah. So essentially, you are rejecting the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true, and that happens 6.5% of the time, and the alpha value is 0.065. Okay. Now let's understand beta a little more clearly. As I said, beta is when the null hypothesis is not true. So we know that the null hypothesis is probability of head is 0.5, and therefore the alternate hypothesis is not equal to 0.5. Now, the not equal to 0.5 could mean that it is 0.1, it could be 0.2, 0.23, it could be various series of values up to 0.99, yeah, or up to 1. So, we can compute the beta by saying, okay, if the truth is really that the coin is not fair, but then we need to make an assumption as to how unfair the coin is. So, let us make one assumption that if the coin is unfair but to the extent of 0.4. So, essentially the coin is tweaked in some fashion that out of 100 toss of coins you get only 40 heads and 60 tails. Okay. So, there is a small tweaking, the coin is unfair, so therefore the starting probability value is 0.4. So, what happens if you toss a unfair coin where the probability is really 0.4 50 times, and what value, how many times will you get heads out of that? So, again using the distribution we can compute the number of times you will get 0 heads up to the number of times you will get 50 heads on the 50 toss of coins. It turns out that the probability of getting 19 to 31 heads with an unfair coin is really 0.664. Yeah. Now, because you set your alpha at 0.065, which leads you to accept that the coin is fair whenever the range of heads is 19 to 31. Yeah. With an unfair coin also, you will end up accepting the null hypothesis. So, you are saying you should have rejected the null because the coin is really not fair. So, you should have rejected the null hypothesis, but because you set your alpha at 0.065, your acceptable range became 19 to 31. So, in an unfair coin there is a 66.4% chance that you will get a 19 to 31, and that is a chance that you will have in actually not rejecting the null hypothesis when you should have rejected the null hypothesis. So, this is the beta error that you are making. So, the beta error is not rejecting the null hypothesis when you should have rejected the null hypothesis. So, that is 66.4% or 0.664 when the unfairness in the coin is quantified by p is equal to 0.04. Let us take a scenario where the coin is really been tweaked to a very unfair value. Yeah. So, let us look at a case of what happens if the coin is really tweaked, that is out of let us say millions of tosses, only 10% of the time you will get heads and the remaining 90% you will get tails. Yeah. So, again we can compute the probability distribution of the chance of you getting 19 to 31 heads. Now, it turns out that when the coin is really tweaked to a very unfair level, it's almost close to a 0. I mean, it's not really 0, it's a very small quantity. Yeah. So, there is a very small chance of you getting 19 to 31 heads. So, if you had set up your alpha at 0.065 and therefore your acceptance range became 19 to 31, if the coin is very unfair, you are going to not make any mistake at all, because there is only a 0% probability of getting this value, and therefore there is a 0% probability of you not rejecting the null hypothesis when you should be. Yeah. So, what this means is that if the coin is very unfair, you will end up rejecting the null hypothesis. So, you are making no errors there is no beta error that gets made in this case. Yeah. So, essentially if you set your range as 19 to 31, you are looking at a beta of 0.664, and 19 to 31 you are ending up with a beta of 0.0 if the probability of H is equal to 0.1. So, we had looked at the distribution and the beta value associated with tweaked coins. So, we looked at two examples of what if the tweaking is minor. So, there is a 40% chance of getting a head, We also looked at a case of where the coin is tweaked so much that there is only a 10% chance of head, and we derived two different beta value. So we can actually do this for many different probabilities of tweaking. So what we have here is really if the probability ranges between 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 up to 0.9. So if this is the probability of head, so this is the way the tweaking has been done, and what is the associated beta level. So if you remember that we had computed for 0.4 it was 0.664, and for 0.1 it was 0. So we can do this for a wide range of the probabilities, hypothesized probabilities, and we can compute the beta values. And an interesting term that gets used is really the 1 minus beta. So that's nothing but 1 minus 0, etc. So which is called the power of the test. So normally one looks for a very high power. So a high powered test is a lot more desirable in decision making compared to a very low powered test. So the higher the power of the test, the better it is. So if you plot the probabilities, so essentially on the x-axis we have got the probability of head being 0.1 up to 0.9, and on the y-axis we have plotted the 1 minus beta, which is really the power of the test. And as we said, the higher the power, the better it is. So as you can notice from this graph that you have a very high power for these ranges. So the test really does well when the probabilities are 0.1, 0.2, etc., etc. But closer to the hypothesized value of 0.5, the power of the test really goes down. Yeah. Now this is true for all cases. So normally, let's say you hypothesize that it is 96, but it is slightly different. It's only 95. Then the power of the test is very low at that point. Yeah. Again, depending upon the kind of consequences and the risk and reward associated with it, you may want to have increase the beta levels. But as we had seen, the alpha and beta are kind of inversely related. So they are not, there's no definitive equation between them, and they are roughly inversely related. So if you want to improve the power levels, which means you need to reduce the beta. Now that can be achieved only through two means. Either you are willing to increase your alpha level, so increase the risk of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. So that's one method of doing it. So that would automatically bring down the alpha beta level. So you can kind of optimize between the alpha and beta levels which you are comfortable with. Or the alternative is really to increase the number of sample that you have in the estimation process, or increase the number of trials that you used in the estimation process. So let's look at the test statistic. That's the other component of the hypothesis test. So the test statistics, as I said, is a function of what you are measuring, what the sample statistic is, and what the distribution is. So let's understand this in a slightly greater detail. So all software, when you do a hypothesis test, at the end of any program that you do, will give you two values. One is it will give you a test statistic value, and the two, it will give you a p-value. Yeah. Now the test statistic will normally you will have a z statistic, a t statistic, chi-square, or f. Now all these are connected with the kind of distribution the sampling parameter takes. The z statistics is a function, is a normal distribution function. The t is a student t distribution, which again gets closely approximated to a normal distribution whenever the sample size is greater than 30. Chi-square is a kind of a z-square distribution, and f test is the ratio of two chi-squares. That's a distribution. So each of this is used for the different parameters. Normally the z is used for testing out proportions, t is tested out for testing out means, chi-square is tested out for distributions or associations, and f is used for testing out variances. And as I said, the different test statistics that we will encounter are the z, t, chi-square, and f statistics. So the choice of a test is really a function of A, what is tested, and 2, what is the assumed distribution of the population on what is tested, and 3, the number of samples involved. So let's look at each of these a little more carefully. What is tested is, in the examples that we looked at till now, we talked about a mobile phone battery being 96 hours, and really what we are testing out is an average value. So we are computing the number of hours each battery lost, and we take an average. So we are actually testing out whether the mean of a sample and using the mean of a sample to make some inference about the mean of the population. Or in the case of tossing of a coin, we are using the proportion that we are getting out of a test to check out what the population proportion of the number of heads would be. So what is tested normally is we test differences, and differences pertaining to proportions, means and variances. So some of the common things is a proportion equal to a particular value. So in the case of coin toss, we said is the proportion of heads really equal to 0.5. So the null hypothesis is pi is equal to 0.5. So that's what we are testing out. Yeah. Or two proportions from the study relating to two different subgroups are equal or different. For example, let's say we have two coins, and we need to choose one coin for our, let's say, the bet or the wager, and you need to decide which one. So your null hypothesis is that the proportion of heads across the two coins is the same. So here it's not pi is equal to a certain value, but pi 1 is equal to pi 2 is what we are testing out. Yeah. The third case, average from the study equal to a particular value. So we said that the mobile phone that we had, it's 96 hours. Yeah. Or let's say we have two batches of mobile phone that gets made, and we are interested in knowing is there a difference in the number of hours that the battery lasts. So the hypothesis would be mu1 is equal to mu2. Yeah. And in many cases we want to understand is the variance from one group different from the variance from the other group. So essentially we are testing out is mu1 squared is equal to mu2 squared. Is the variance amongst, let's say, the age variance or the salary difference variance in men, is it different from the salary variance in women? So then the salary variance in men, the salary variance in women become the things that you test for. So essentially we test differences. So the second item that really determines what should be the test statistic that you use is really the distribution of the population of what is tested. Normally different assumptions get made about the distribution, and we also looked at when we went through the descriptive statistics, there are some methods of understanding whether the distribution really is a normal distribution or not a normal distribution by using PP plots and QQ plots, etc. So you can use any of those methods to understand and make assumptions about distributions and verify whether those assumptions are correct or not. But the class of parametric tests, which is what we are dealing in this session, they make an assumption about the population parameters being normally distributed in the population itself. But we also saw that the central limit theorem talks about if you draw large enough sample size from the population, and if the population is very large, the sampling distribution tends to be normally distributed irrespective of what the population distribution is. So we use that to our advantage in even if the population is not purely normally distributed, if the sampling distribution is normally distributed, we can conduct many of these parametric statistical tests. In case that you conclude that even your sampling distribution is not normally distributed, then you need to resort to a family of tests called the non-parametric test, and there is a whole host of tests which are available in that domain. The third item that's important in determining what is the kind of test that you do is really the concept of the number of samples involved. Now, it's a slightly tricky concept because the number of samples, the way the definition is slightly different. So, let's look at it through some examples here. Supposing you want to test whether there's a set of used car and there's a data that's available for what's the price of each used car and whether the used car is damaged or not damaged, etc. You want to test out whether the proportion of cars that have a damage is less than 25%. So you are taking a sample and you are checking out what is the percentage of car that really has a damage in the sample, and that becomes your p hat. And then you are saying your null hypothesis is that its pi is 25%, but your p hat is let's say you had a 27% is the value that turned out, and you want to check whether really the hypothesis of pi is equal to 25%, can you reject it or not reject it. So here what you are doing here is really you have only one set of data which is used cars, and then there is one variable that you are testing whether there is a damage or no damage. So this is called a one sample test. Let us look at a two sample test. Supposing the same question that was asked is the damage related to transmission type? Is the damage related to transmission type? So essentially now the hypothesis that we have is that the pi, which is the damage of the car amongst transmission type of automatic gear, is it equal to the pi of damage which is amongst manual transmission? Yeah. So here we are testing out, we are computing two different p hats. So p hat is for, so we are taking a sample of automatic transmission vehicle, and within that we are finding out what proportion of those have a damage. Let's say this turns out to be 22%, and then you also have a p hat of amongst manual transmission cars. You are taking a sample, and that sample suggests there is a 26% of these are damaged, and the null hypothesis is that there is no difference between the two. So here you are computing two different p hats, and they are computed from data which are completely independent of each other. So there is absolutely no overlap between the two data sets. You have a set of data which are related to automatic transmission, you have a set of data which is related to manual transmission, and you are making a comparison between the two in terms of you are computing the two p hats, and then your null hypothesis is that is the population percentage of damage in automatic car is the same as the manual cars. So this is considered as there is absolutely no overlap. So these are called two sample independent. So two independent sample test is a test description. Let us look at a slightly more tricky concept of what is called a paired sample. So let us suppose we have a set of data which is related to a lot of customers data, and so series of customers, and whether they subscribe to data services, yes, no, and whether they subscribe to voice services, yes, no. Yeah. And we want to know whether in the population is the percentage of people who are subscribing to a data service, is it equal to the percentage of people subscribing to voice services. Here you can compute a p hat here by looking at your sample data, and this is your data and your p hat of voice. The difference between this and the previous example that you looked at is that the data is related, that is for each individual we are taking two different variables and we are comparing at a cumulative level, are these variables equal to or different from each other. So here the data comes from the same respondents, the same set of people are answering the two different variables. So they are defining the two different variables, and you are computing the difference between these two. Yeah, this could very well be, let's say, employees, salaries 5 years back, salaries now, and you're trying to find out whether there's a difference or not. So you're computing a mean value here, you're computing a mean value here. Yeah. So this is a set of a type of hypothesis test where you're checking out two different variables from the same set of rows of data. So the data comes from the same set of people, processes, etc. And so these are called paired sample test. So we looked at, you have a situation of one sample, you have a situation of two samples which are independent of each other, and third you have two samples which are paired, which is essentially the same source, two different variables that is coming out from the same sources. So all these three things put together describe what the test statistics should be.